Hi, TP. I'm reviewing a, a hand history from the PokerStars Sunday 500. I like this tournament. A lot of people complain about it having a strong field, and definitely there are a lot of good players who play it. But I don't know. In my experience, it draws like 1,000 plus players. I think this was an especially big one, as I recall. And there's I think plenty of weaker players, and it's got a very nice structure as well. And for whatever reason, I have kind of a history of running well in it. So I like playing this tournament. I play it when I can, and I do think I mean, it allows for a lot of interesting spots because of the fact that that there is this wide range of players playing it, and because it's so well structured, I do think, if nothing else, it should make for some pretty good hand history review material, just because there are a lot of interesting spots that you can get into. I actually want to back up to the pre-flop here. I don't think that this is the world's most obvious call out of the small blind, and I realize some people may be looking at this and thinking, oh, well, you're 200 big blinds deep, you've got a suited connector, what's the problem? And there's not a huge problem. I don't think this is a terrible mistake, and depending on who these players were, I think if I knew them to be very good players, I think a fold would be correct. If I knew them to be very poor players, I think a call would clearly be correct. The size of your suited connector matters a lot here. I think calling with 5-4 suited would be a pretty significant mistake. Um, Being out of position hurts more when you're deeper. The deep stacks can't benefit everyone, and I think sometimes people are just like, well, it's deep. You can play whatever hand you want, or you can play speculative hands or something like that. I mean, aces is always going to be a better hand than the 9-8 suited, and being out of position is going to hurt you, and it's going to hurt you when you have suited connectors. You're going to win less when you make the best hand. You're going to end up folding the best hand more often because it's easier for people to bluff you when you're out of position, and it's going to be harder for you to bluff them when you're out of position. So all these things count against you. They count against you more the deeper that you are. And the fact that it's a multi-way pot doesn't necessarily help me either because I'm out of position now to more than one person. So I'm kind of like paying a position tax to each one of these players. So I certainly don't hate this call. I think I would definitely call here with like Jack 10 or Queen 10, Queen Jack suited. I would definitely fold, or I hope I would fold 5-4 suited. I think it's a correct fold. And 9-8 suited is somewhere in the middle. I didn't recognize either of these players, which doesn't tell me too much. I don't necessarily recognize all the best players who are playing these days. So I did come in, and I ended up just folding middle pair with a backdoor flush draw, and actually a backdoor straight draw as well, I guess. Uh, no backdoor straight draw. But in any event, I ended up just folding with a bet and a call. If this player folds, then I would have called, but I think he's very likely to have. I think his range is going to look like pocket pairs between a 9 and a king. And, tens, jacks are plausible hands for him to be flatting in early position. He'd have a king. He could have. There are probably a couple of better nines he would play. I doubt there are worse nines that he's playing. And then he could have draws, and the draws I'm really not. I'm not in particularly good shape. 10 jack is in fine shape against me. Two clubs is going to have at least one overcard against me, so my hand's going to be pretty difficult to play against Kimber. And then this guy, he's an under the gun raiser, and you can't necessarily read a lot into his c-bet, but he does have a lot of strong hands in his range as well. So my hand, I think, is going to be quite difficult to continue with. It's not like I'm going to be happy check raising if I turn a spade, or if I turn. I guess I can feel okay about my hand if I turn a 9 or an 8, but I still can't like play for stacks or anything. So I think it's a pretty clear flop fold, and the most surprising thing to some people might just be that I think it's even kind of close whether to call pre-flop. And you'll probably see me. I just think a lot of tournament players kind of overestimate what you can get away with just because you're deep, and a lot still depends on who your opponents are and what your position is. And I think a lot of people just really play too many speculative hands and end up giving away a lot of money thinking that they're making like good investments, or thinking, well, if I just flop a strong hand, I can win a big pot, and kind of ignoring how difficult it actually is to like flop a strong hand. That's not an easy thing to do. So pretty clear 3-bet there with jacks. Don't imagine I need to explain too much of that to anybody. A7 offsuit, middle position. Nothing. No reason to play that hand, I don't think. This cold call from Pablox. I think it's not too surprising that Pablito is coming in once Pablox calls. Definitely significant that Pablito doesn't 3-bet, or sorry, doesn't 4-bet, and I think I would assume Pablox is usually going to 4-bet kings or aces also. So that's really a nice bit of information to have, that if I do flop an overpair, yeah, I don't really have to worry about better overpairs being out there, so that's nice. I wouldn't be surprised if Ace King is in both of these players' ranges. Pablito might squeeze with it. This player might four bet with it, but plenty of people might just flat with Ace King as well. I think that jacks, tens, some really good suited connectors. At least for Pablito, hands like Ace Jack suited, King Queen suited. Although I have some blockers there, maybe King Jack suited. I think these are all pretty plausible for him. Smaller pairs that are set mining. Pavlov's, it's hard to say. There's what his range should be, and then there's what it might be if he's a loose player. So we'll have to see. But the really significant thing is that I'm not worried about anyone having kings or aces when this board comes down. I think I definitely want to c-bet here. I can get value from worse pocket pairs. I would like to charge overcards. Definitely the possibility that someone has 7-6 or clubs. I think I can get called by just a lot of hands that are less good than mine, and I don't think checking really accomplishes all that much. Now, Pablito ends up check raising me, and now we want to think about a couple things. We can try to guess at his range, and if you have a solid idea of what his range would look like, then you can proceed accordingly. On the one hand, there are not very many hands that could beat us. I'm not worried about him playing 8-5, so it's just a question. I'm really only worried about him having a set here, and against that we have to weigh what's the possibility that he's just check raising as a bluff. I think, and the reason I break it down that way, I don't think that he's check raising a worse hand for value. I'd be very surprised if he's check raising jacks or tens or nines here. It would be a little bit more likely in a heads-up pot. It would be a little bit more likely if we were in later position. But here, he opened in early position. I 3-bet in early position, and I betted to two people, one of whom cold called me. I just don't think a lot of people are going to be going crazy with tens or jacks. Folding here is a disaster if your opponent is capable of going crazy with tens or jacks, or is likely to, because he can have those hands a lot more easily than he can have a set. So you don't fold to someone who's going to do that, but I feel pretty comfortable thinking he's not going to do that. So the question is, how often is he going to be doing this as a semi-bluff versus how often is he going to be doing it with a set? The semi-bluffs have decent equity against queens, whereas the sets have queens crushed. So I'd really need him to be doing it as a semi-bluff quite often, and also sometimes be slow playing his sets to justify continuing. Another way of looking at this is to think about my own range and to try to decide where queens belong. In truth, I don't think there's much difference between queens versus kings or aces. The big, a hand like the nut flush draw has slightly less equity, actually substantially less equity against aces than it does against queens, so there's a bit of an extra case for continuing there. Having a club in your hand can go both ways. It cuts back the equity of flush draws, and it gives you a little bit of backdoor equity against sets, but it is also a blocker to him having a flush draw in the first place, which means his range will be a little bit more weighted towards sets. What I'm trying to do here is find the best hands in my range to continue with. I think that folding queens here is exploitable, and I guess it's an exploitation. It's an exploitation that I'm capable of, that I'm comfortable with. I don't think that 8s, 5s, or 3s are really in my range. The absolute best hands for me to continue with are going to be when I have a big draw myself, which is really just going to be like ace king suited, ace queen suited, maybe ace jack suited if I 3-bet that, but probably in this spot I would just call it. So that's really only two combinations of hands I'm going to be continuing to this check raise. So I think it's pretty exploitable to let go of queens, but I just the sense I got, I guess, is that I just didn't think he was check raising worse for value, and I didn't think that he was check raising. And I just don't think I'm faring very well against a range of sets and semi-bluffs if that's all that he can have. So I did end up ditching that. The way for people to exploit that is to check raise bluff, a lot of flops against me in 3-bet pots where someone has cold called, and if they're doing that, then I'll be in trouble. There's a lot of hands in this hand history, so I'm just skipping through, at least right now, hands that I haven't played yet. This Jacko Maria character has been kind of active so far, so I think just going to 4-bet in position when I have kings. And this might seem like a little big for a 4-bet. There are a couple reasons. You really can't just use your standard MTT sizing when you're 150 blinds deep. You're not, if you just 3-bet here to like 600, you're really not going to be able to get stacks in that often with just an overpair. And versus if you three bet to like 900, I think that a lot of people, once they three bet, are just, they're not going to fold pre-flop. If he has ace queen, if he has tens, if he has sevens for that matter, he decided to three bet. Like most people are going to call this three bet, this four bet once they three bet. So it just kind of exploitably, you can use a big sizing because people are going to call, and you can get money in the pot when you have the best hand, and then also you have a bigger pot. Like once you go to the flop, if the flop is 10 high, people can have trouble folding queens or jacks, and then you can get, if there's 1800 in the pot already, you can probably get another 12 or 1300 ahead of the person. People are only going to put so much money in the pot with those hands. They're usually going to do it on early streets, and there's a lot to be said for building that pot. Likewise, if you're bluffing here, you got to put some pressure on the person, and if I do have plans of bluffing profitably on future streets, I want to build up a pot that I'm going to be able to steal. The more money he puts in now that he can't defend later, that again works to my advantage. So I think that a somewhat larger sizing is appropriate here, whether or not I have a value hand. I was a bit surprised actually that the Jacko folded. That's something to keep in mind. It's a note to take because I generally think that at this stage a lot of people don't three bet light. So this is another one some people might consider controversial, that I'm folding queen 10 suited here. Your position matters a lot when you're calling. I think that a lot of people tend to, they're very position conscious when it comes to opening, but then when it comes to calling raises, they pretend like their position just doesn't matter. When you call here, there's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how can I not count? Seven people who could wake up with big hands. And then you either don't end up seeing the flop, or it's much more expensive for you to see the flop. And even if these people just call up behind you, playing queen 10 suited with two people behind you in a four-way pot is pretty different from playing it with absolute position. So I would call if I had the button, but being in early position is very different from being on the button in terms of what hands you can call with. And I think even, I guess I'd probably call here with queen jack suited. So maybe this is somewhat close, but I do think it's a fold. Like I don't think it would really be a good idea to call. You can also look like Greg Merson is the player on the button, so that's a little extra incentive to fold versus if it's like a lot of really weak players behind you. Now we've got Jacko Maria open limping. Pretty happy to see a free flop with my ace-8 offsuit. This is a decent flop for me. I'm just going to be check folding if Maria bets, but it would be nice to see a free card. And I'll probably have the best hand as well if she checks. So noticing now she bets 240 into 180. So probably another indication that this player is not that great. Not that it's necessarily even a mistake to have a range for doing that, just that I think most players who actually do it tend not to be very good. It's more of an empirical point than a theoretical point. Nothing wrong with raising live Boreas blind with ace-jack offsuit. And by nothing wrong, I mean mandatory. This is another one, 6-3 suited might look like, oh, it's suited, it's kind of connected. Position's pretty bad. I would open it from the button, but there's a pretty huge difference being in this position versus being on the button. And again, just because you're kind of deep doesn't mean you can just start showing a profit with all these really junky hands. That one I think I probably should have opened. The argument I can see against doing it is just, again, it's Merson in the big blind. He's the player I'm most likely to end up playing against. And with a weaker player in the blind, I'd be a lot more inclined to play this. But I still think this should probably be an open from this position. Another very mandatory open there with ace-5 suited. I think that checking this flop is just the right play. I don't, I think sometimes people are like overly concerned that their opponents are just instantly going to bluff every time that you check. If it were really that easy to induce your opponents to fire at flops, then you would just always slow play your big hands, and that's obviously not the way that you play, or I don't think it's the way most people play. There are certain opponents against him that's true and correct, but I think that a check here, there's a lot of pretty decent hands, 10-9, Jack-9, 10-8, Jack-8. There are, I can think of a fair number of hands where I'd be checking and calling here. So it's not like my check just instantly indicates that I'm going to be folding to a bet. In this instance, I am, but I think that if I do bet with ace-5, I've almost no equity when called. I'm extremely unlikely to win the pot once I'm called. The one thing I have going for me is that I could try to double barrel if a spade turns, but I don't think this is a very good hand for continuation betting. It's quite a coordinated board, and I think that Liv is probably going to defend pretty frequently. Like, I just don't think she's going to fold to a bet that often on this board in these positions. It's the second time I've raised her from the small blind. I don't think I should just be firing here arbitrarily. And I do have a hand where if we end up checking it down, I could win. There's a number of decent turn cards for me, so seeing a free card is pretty nice. And if she bets, I'll just fold and figure I probably don't have a lot of equity against her range. That's not to say her range won't contain hands worse than ace five. It certainly will. But you're supposed to get bluffed sometimes. And maybe I just did, but so be it. There might be a case for betting the turn. I would certainly bet the turn if it were a spade. But again, I think that she's probably, it's not like she's only going to call me with a straight. I think she's probably going to call pretty light there. This, I think, should probably be a 3-bet. Pablito, it would depend a little on how much Pablito's been opening, but suited aces, especially with big kickers, are really nice hands when, I guess we're not really that deep at this point, we're a little over 100 big blinds deep, but he's opening from pretty late position. The one strong argument in favor of not 3-betting, well, two. One is that his opening range may not be that wide. He seems a bit more active, but in general, people aren't that active pre-ante, so his calling, or his raising range may actually be tighter than it theoretically should be. The other big argument is that I would like to get into pots with Jack Maria. It seems like she is just waiting to go off. So I think if it's otherwise relatively close, whether to 3-bet or call, trying to draw this weaker player into the pot, probably a good idea. I think this is a clear call on this flop. I don't know how much convincing you need of that point, but clearly I'm not going to have a pair here all that often. Like if I never call without a pair, that's going to be kind of problematic. Ace Jack could easily still be the best hand, not to mention like I'm going to have a lot of equity if Pablito has like pocket tens or something. My equity is pretty good, 2 overcards and backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. I just think I could maybe see folding Ace Jack offsuit, although even that wouldn't be a terrible call. But I think this is pretty mandatory. Tiny little check raise from Maria. I think that I don't think we're going to see a bluff here. I think this most likely indicates a small pocket pair, but a bigger pair than the board, but 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that neighborhood that wasn't good enough to 3-bet pre-flop. But now she's thinking she might have the best hand, and it was just kind of making that obvious. The thing is, I don't think it doesn't really seem like it's going to be possible to bluff her off of that hand. We're deep enough that maybe I could try to put a ton of pressure on her, but really what I'm going to end up doing is just taking advantage of the good pot odds that she's giving me. And it may not seem like it, but calling here is actually exploiting kind of a mistake that she's making, or it is taking advantage of the weakness that she's showing. So I have an option now. I could try to like barrel off, I guess, bet big here and then bet big or shove on the river, but I don't think that's going to be the best way of exploiting this player. So I'm going to take a free card and just hope to hit an ace or a jack on the river. And so you can see, I think, pretty clearly why I want to call on the flop if now I'm going to get to see a free river. It's pretty cheap for me to see 2 more cards. Certainly not going to try to bluff at this point. And yeah, Maria's got the 6s. So that's fine. I mean, I didn't get to take the pot away from her, which is a little unfortunate, but I did get to draw for free, which is worth something. It just didn't pan out this time. Definitely happy about folding that 9-8 offsuit. All right, this is a pretty interesting spot. This is not a flop that I would continuation bet very often if I miss. Just with this many people in the pot, the queen and the 10, both spades, having 2 Broadway cards on the board means that people are going to have pairs or draws really, really often. So if I'm sitting here with ace king of hearts, I'm not going to bet this flop. Ace king of spades, different story. Ace jack of spades, different story. Maybe even ace jack of diamonds, different story. But I'm really not going to be c-betting this flop very often. If I don't have a good hand, I would probably bet like aces, kings, ace, queen. This is sort of vulnerable, but probably best 1 pair kinds of hands I would bet. But in general, I'm going to be checking a lot on this board. So although there's a bit of risk involved in checking 10s, I think there's less risk involved here than you might assume. One really big factor is that if Pablo or especially if Maria has a queen, we're going to see a bet. I don't think either of those players is going to check a queen. So if someone actually has like there are two costs to slow playing. If you've seen my getting paid series, I talk a lot about this. But the two costs to slow playing are not building a pot if somebody has the second best hand, like letting them get closer to showdown for free can be a problem. And here we are deep enough that I'd like to build a pot on three streets. If I know someone has a queen, I would like to start building a pot. But in this case, I think that at least if Pablo or Jocko has a queen, we're going to see a bet. So I'm not really failing to build a pot against a queen. If no one bets, it means probably no one has a queen, or maybe Odonkor has a queen. I also think there's a good chance that Pablo or Jocko might bet with a draw, especially with a decent draw. And pocket tens is a lot less vulnerable to draws than ace queen is. Um, not only are there some overcards or two pair draws that are threats to ace queen, but also if someone does turn a straight or a flush, ace queen is drawing dead usually against that hand. Whereas the pocket tens, I'm going to have some pretty significant redraws. So I think sometimes people are a little too focused on just wanting to make sure they win the pot immediately and not necessarily maximizing their outcome. But I think, and again, people very well may bet their draws when checked too. So I don't think betting here would be terrible by any means, but I think that checking this board can produce a lot of good outcomes for you. I would certainly check a set of queens here. Tens, again, the big reason to bet tens might be if someone already has a queen, but especially because Jacko seems so inclined towards spazzing out and just kind of always betting when she thinks she has the best hand, like made that little check raise with the pocket sixes. We might, I mean, for all we know, Jocko's going to bet like ace five here when checked to and open the betting for me anyway. So I think there's a lot to be said for checking. And if it checks through, that there's some risk associated with that, but it does also create deception about my hand. And if people later refuse to put me on a strong hand because I checked the flop, that can work out well for me too. So there are pluses and minuses. You don't just want to zero in on, oh my God, what if a draw card gets there on the turn? That is a risk, that's a cost, but you have to look at what are the advantages. Maria does oblige me, bets, and bets pretty large actually. I mean, if we remember the sizing that she used when she check raised with those pocket sixes, maybe she thought it was big because she wasn't really thinking about our bet and call, but it was quite a small raise compared to what was already in the pot, and now she's betting pretty big. So I take that to be a good sign. I'm certainly going to check raise when it gets back around to me. Now Donkor ends up calling, which is nice. I think that I should be check raising larger. I don't really know why I chose such a small size. I think a bigger check raise is nice for a number of reasons. I mean, I think that Maria is somewhat unlikely to fold a queen. I mean, I'm showing a ton of strength here, but still, I think Maria may just be weak enough to not fold a queen. And I think that this small check raise, it's okay, so I'm not actually offering a good price to draws, especially because I'm going to bet again on the next street. You can see here it's getting slightly better than 2-1. Nobody's going to be correct to call me with a draw, especially because spades, for instance, only have 8 outs and not 9. So some people may be miscounting their outs. But assuming I bet the next street, people are not getting the right price to draw. So if you're looking at this and thinking like, oh, you have to raise more to charge those draws, no, you really don't. You want people calling with a draw, especially when you have a set. You don't want to just blow draws out of the water. So it's not so much, I just think that people would probably be willing to call more than this, and also that if I only get called in one spot, which is likely, I would like to be able to shove the next street and get it all in before the river, because the board is just going to be getting scarier and scarier both for me and for my value target. So I think a bigger check raise, not even a lot bigger, but just making it like 2100 instead of 1850 is going to make it a little easier for me to ship it on the next street and not have that being a big overbet. It's still not a big overbet at this point, and now things have changed significantly with me getting probably the best card in the deck. But I just think it would be nice if this was the other way around, if there were 5400 in my pot and 6000 in 5,400 in my stack and 6,000 in the pot instead of the other way around. I think that would be a little better in terms of just shipping it on the turn. Now that I've got the best hand, basically an unbeatable hand, there's no desire for me to bet big. In fact, I could bet quite small here. I think that if Donkor has a flush, it's I mean, some people might have the discipline to fold it. He probably should fold it if I continue to bet and bet strongly, especially if he has a non-nut flush. But I think a lot of people are going to have trouble letting go of a flush. So I'm almost going to take it for granted, unless the board double pairs on the river, which I have a lot of blockers to that happening. I'm going to almost take it for granted that I can stack a flush, and I'm going to continue to think about, is there a chance to get value from lesser hands? So I think that that actually makes it a little close whether I should even bet the turn. I guess the other disadvantage of checking against, if he does have a low flush, letting a fourth spade come out could be bad. So I think there is a case for betting very small here. I do think if you're really trying to maximize value against a queen, checking could be better. Um, you might even induce a bluff. Like if you check behind here and it looks like you're afraid of the flush and Odunkor actually has a straight draw, you could induce him to bluff on the river. I think there's a pretty good case to be made for checking the turn. I ended up betting and not even really betting that small. I think if I'm gonna betting a little smaller than this could even be correct and just like really make the pot odds enticing for him. There's still gonna be plenty of room for me to shove the river. I think this looks pretty strong on my part. I'm not thrilled with this bet, to be honest. Thankfully, he chooses to ignore all that and chip it on me with the second nut flush, gets it in, drawing dead, and I win a nice big bet. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why playing king's head suited or king eight suited when you're deep doesn't necessarily lead to great things. It's not like his. I don't think his implied odds are huge playing king eight suited even when he hits a flush. Like I can see that there are three spades on the board. If I have pocket aces without a spade there, I'm not going to pay him off huge. And he ended up making a second best hand with a flush. And you're probably accustomed to thinking of flushes as really strong hands, and of course they are. But I'm not necessarily going to play a huge pot with him when he makes a flush, especially when he has a king high flush. If I do play a big pot with him, I'm going to have a full house or I'm going to have a higher flush probably. So, not. I don't know that his getting involved in the pot there was the greatest idea. Really, no point at all in c betting here. It's so likely that somebody has an ace. Um, I think that even calling here is maybe a little bit questionable, but I don't know how many aces Liv is actually going to bet on the flop. Like if she has ace jack, I don't know that she would bet that, and she is just kind of betting less than half the pot when everyone checks to her. I would probably be folding if she had checked and then Pablo bet the turn, but because at that point he's like kind of betting out of position to four people. Liv is betting into four people who have shown weakness, and also Liv is probably a better player than Pablo. Although I don't know, I don't actually know anything about who that is, but I'm just kind of saying that because I do recognize Liv, of course. So I think this is somewhat close in terms of whether to call, but I am also going to check some of my weaker aces, like ace jack. I'd probably be checking here, and aces weaker than that. So this does help to have kind of a balanced check calling range, where if she chooses to keep barreling at me, she's going to be barreling into aces somewhat often, but I am also going to have a range for check calling the flop and check folding the turn, and that's how it should be. You're not supposed to just once you check call the flop, it shouldn't be the case that you're never check folding the turn, because then why would she ever bluff? And therefore, why would you ever call with bluff catchers? Like there's, I guess it's just kind of basic game theory. Like you should have a check calling range and a check folding range, and a range for check calling once, and a range for check calling twice, and a range for check calling three times. And unless there's like some specific mistake you're trying to exploit on your opponent's part, like you think they either bluff too much or not enough. I do get to see a free river, not the greatest river card in the world, and when she ends up betting big on the river, again, I'm still going to play some aces this way. Like if I have ace 10, I'm probably going to check the river. So it's not like, I think tens is basically the bottom of my range at this point, and there's no reason for me to call a basically pot-sized bet with it. No reason she can't be value betting an ace. She could even be betting an ace trying to get me to fold off a chop or something, but she can bet any ace with impunity because she doesn't have to worry about being outkicked really. I think her line is somewhat consistent with her having an ace, and this is just not the right hand to get suspicious with. I guess I could raise there, but that would I think that would be better than calling. Pretty clear fold. You're really just drawing on a gut shot. Even hitting a four there doesn't help you that much because it's going to make somebody a straight, most likely. So if you're calling there with pocket fours, I think you're making a pretty big mistake. Certainly going to be calling heads up in position with ace deuce suited. Could even make a case for three betting it, but I three bet Pablito a lot. I think I'm going to play better than he will post flop, so I'm pretty happy just to take a flop in position and keep both of our ranges wide. I think that's going to favor me. This is actually a pretty good flop for me. Very good chance ace high is still the best hand. Plus I've got a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. So very happy just to call at this point. Um, there might be a case for raising now. In fact, I think I probably should raise this. I think a three bet is quite unlikely, and I actually might be able to call a three bet. I might have enough equity to call if I'm three bet, but I think he could just be barreling again, even with a five maybe. Thinking like just being happy to take it, thinking he might have the best hand. I think he's going to bet fold some hands better than ace two suited. Plus, he could be drawing here. He could be betting 6-7, queen jack, 8-7. There's a lot of draws out there that I'm actually ahead of. Where you can almost think of this as like I can raise. I can cause better hands to fold, and I can cause worse hands to call. Like that's kind of the power of the nut flush draw. So I think I should probably raise this turn bet. As long as you don't fold, you're not making a huge mistake. But I actually would like the idea of raising. I don't think there's much of a case for turning my hand into a bluff on the river with the number of draws that missed. I think if I was going to bluff, raising the turn was the time to do it. At this point, I do have some showdown value against his missed flush draws, and I also don't think I have very much fold equity if he does have a hand better than ace two. So I think it's unlikely he's checking and folding it. So I check it back, and I was ahead of king jack, which just goes to show why I probably should have raised the turn. Right, because I mean, even though I'm ahead, he's drawing pretty live there. Um, Given that Maria is the pre-flop raiser, maybe I should have called with this. We're I know I've talked some about not wanting to play these speculative hands as much. It's a big difference when you're on the button. I mean, the position is really going to determine a lot about the playability of these hands. I still wouldn't call this in general in this situation. I don't think this is a call, but my desire to get into pots with Maria, maybe I should be calling here. I think I would call here with 8-6 suited. I think I should. Now I'm gonna have to play it out to see. Well, probably wouldn't have won that pot anyway. Really don't want to be calling a three bet out of position with queen jack suited. At this point, we're not going to be that deep if I call. So, I mean, maybe that actually works a little bit to my advantage. But this is such an easily dominated hand. I mean, there's going to end up being like this is like a stack to pot ratio of 4-1 or something, which if I can't play top pair strongly, and I don't think I can, I really shouldn't be getting involved in the pot. Like, there's two benefits to playing this hand. One is that it can flop a pretty good pair, but I'm not really going to feel good about a pair in this situation if I flop it. And two is that I can flop a good draw that I can play aggressively. But again, here I think Pavlox's range is pretty strong, such that it's not like I'm just going to check raise and check raise if I flop a flush draw and get him to fold a ton of the time or anything. So no real reason to call the three bet with that, I don't think. Pretty sure you're not going to show a profit calling that. A small three bet's a different story if you're getting really good pot odds, but that was a pretty sizable three bet. Arguably, I should have called here, getting 3.5 to 1 with antes in the pot. I certainly would have called, but again, it's a pretty easily dominated hand against the competent under the gun raiser. There are people I'd rather be picking fights with, that's for sure. So I've three bet Pablito quite a lot, and we know he's opening quite a lot. So I think that ace jack offsuit still might not be the greatest three betting hand. Ace jack suited is a much better three betting hand when we're I guess we're not really that much more than 100 big blinds deep at this point, but just the fact that ace jack really can't make anything better than one pair too often does make it not the greatest three betting hand when you're on the deep side. So it might be better to flat, but I just know that Pablito is opening so wide here. It's been the case he's been opening so wide, and I've been three betting him a lot. I mean, I've actually had good hands, you've seen them, but from his perspective, it probably looks like I've been three betting him a lot. So again, that could lead to him calling later than usual, which it can lead to some dicey situations when you're out of position, but ultimately I'm going to get more value, I think, out of three betting my ace jack. Now Pablito puts in the fourth bet, and I could see Pablito doing this with a pretty balanced range. I mean, I do think he's going to do this with some of his best hands for value, but I don't think it's a guarantee he has a hand like that. As I said, I have been three betting him a lot, and so we want to think about maybe having a a somewhat balanced five betting range, meaning I'm not just only going to five bet him light because I think he's ridiculously weak. I'm not only going to five bet him strong because I think he's ridiculously strong. I think I ought to have a five bet folding range and also a five bet for value range. I think that the way to build your five bet folding range is to look at what are the best hands that you would three bet that are not good enough to call. So I really don't want to call this three bet out of position with ace jack offsuit. Again, ace jack suited, I'll be a little more inclined to go to the flop with it, but the problem here, this hand is really not going to play well once I call. I'm still going to have to be very cautious if I flop an ace, very cautious if I flop a jack, and if I'm not going to raise, I think I should just fold. However, I think that I would not fold ace queen. I would not fold ace jack suited, and that makes ace jack offsuit the best hand I'm contemplating folding, and therefore it's probably a good light five betting candidate. So that's what I chose to do. If he does call, I'm not going to be. No, I certainly prefer a fold here, but I have decent equity against like pocket tens, something like that. Downright good equity. I have decent equity against pocket queens even. Having an ace in your hand is nice when you make this play. And as I said, I just kind of got the sense Pablito had been. I guess I want to make clear that I'm not. It's not like I'm doing this with just any two cards. It's not that I made some super sick soul read that Pablito was guaranteed to be light here. I don't know if he's light or not. I think that like I said, I think he probably has a balanced range, and that means that I want to have not like a perfectly balanced, but I want to have a somewhat balanced five betting range. I don't only want to five bet value hands, or else because if he assumes I only five bet value hands, which he very well might, I'm going to end up getting exploited by that. And that is true. And maybe if you're watching this and you're only five betting value hands in this spot, a lot of people probably realize that and play accordingly if they're decent players, which he seems to be. So that doesn't mean that you're just going to five bet bluff arbitrarily, but when you have a really good five bet bluffing candidate, you should go for it. And I did, and it worked. Sorry if there was a little skip in the video there. I paused my recorder before I paused the action on the screen because I had to blow my nose, and figured you all would appreciate my not doing that in your ear. King Queen suited I'm going to call. King Queen offsuit wouldn't be the worst call in the world, but and he has been three betting a decent amount, I guess. But I still think that this just isn't a hand that plays that well in a three bet pot when we're 100 plus big blinds deep. I'm just not going to be happy with the kinds of hands that I make. If I make top pair, I'm still going to be playing in a defensive mode, and it's a somewhat sizable three bet. If he just makes it 600, I'd probably call. I don't think it would be awful to call here, but I think I'm just going to end up folding to a lot of flop bets and not winning that much when I do get a good flop. Once again, three betting Pablito for value. And now, I know you saw me slow play a big hand before, but I think that I've been, after just having won a pot without showdown in a five bet pot, and as much as I've been three betting him, I'm hoping that he's still in the mood to play back at me and not to give me a lot of credit. So I think I want to just go ahead and see bet the flop. I'd probably be more inclined to check a hand like aces on this board, actually, where aces is not necessarily a hand I'm going to look to play for stacks, whereas ace jack is. So when I have ace jack, I want to start trying to build the pot and potentially get all in. When I have aces, I can, I'm probably going to be looking more like for two streets of value in this spot, and I can wait until the turn and river, considering how dry the flop is. So that's actually an extra incentive to bet this hand also, because it means he may give me less credit. Like if he expects that I'm going to check some of my big pairs, then he may give me less credit when I actually bet. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to bet here. I do bet, and unfortunately he picks this moment to become credulous. Jack 10 suited is a lot better than 8-7 suited or 9-8 suited or whatever it was that I was saying I should have folded before. So, that's what I was saying. I said maybe I shouldn't have folded before in that similar spot. The size of your suited connector does matter. Again, Maria, maybe I can make an exception. In general, I don't think you should be calling here with 5-4 suited against an under the gun raise. Especially a 3x under the gun raise pre-ante. Maybe make an exception for Maria, though. You could make a case for 3-betting that, but I don't think this is the best time for me to be taking a real wide 3-betting range against Pablito. Would have folded that if it had folded around to me. Even though it turns out Griggy has a even lower suited connector than mine. That's just too junky even to call for a min raise uh, against Maria. Jack 9 offsuit, I think, should pretty clearly be opened. This is a hand that plays a lot better when shallow. And if you look, Liv Bory is actually on the shallower side. She's got fewer than 40 big blinds. So I think if I raise with this hand and she flats, I can feel pretty good about flopping a pair. Um, I wouldn't hate getting all in with it. It wouldn't necessarily be my number one goal, but I just think having two reasonably big cards in a blind battle with someone who's not that deep is good enough and certainly worth an open. And she really had not been defending her big blind that vigorously from my small blind attack, so that's all the more incentive to raise it with Jack 9. I don't know why I'm playing with the HUD turned off. I guess that could be useful to see. Okay, I got that up and running now. Again, blind battle, pretty dry board. I'm not going to fold ace high. I would like it better if I had a backdoor flush draw, but this is a really clear call. And if you're not calling with this, I think you're most likely just getting really run over by people. Like he's betting barely a third of the pot. You just can't fold that off him when you're getting 4-1. Ace high is still a pretty good hand. Doesn't mean I'm not going to fold when he keeps barreling. You know that's fine, but make him actually put that barrel out there. And I will have some hands I'm not going to fold. You know, I don't want to bang this point into the ground, but you know there's plenty of hands. Like I can have hearts in my range, I can have nines in my range and eights and smaller pocket pairs. I might even call again with ace king, or I definitely would call again if I have like a big ace and one heart, but this just isn't a hand that belongs in my call twice range on this particular turn card. If the turn is a 3 or a 4, even if it's a heart, I might call because then I have a gut shot. So you know, again, it's about building a range for continuing. It's not about just always continuing or never continuing. Honestly, I think this is a kind of a questionable call, and one of the arguments in favor of calling is that Maria is on the button. I don't know how likely that makes her. I mean, I guess it means she's going to come into the pot about 40% of the time, looking at her VPIP. But you know, calling a raise, even a min raise with fives in middle position, is a bit questionable because there is that pretty real risk of getting a squeeze from behind. Not to mention, Pablito is an active enough opener that there's really no guarantee that he's going to pay me off when I flop a set. If I don't flop a set, I'm going to be folding to see bets pretty much always. I think that should probably be a fold pre-flop, even though it ends up working out pretty nicely for me that I called. With Pablito betting, I think that I really don't need to raise here. You might look at this and say it's a wet board, but I don't really agree with that. I think 2-4 is quite unlikely for people. So you know, really in terms of straight draws, it's just gut shots, and then if someone might have a flush draw, then again someone might play a flush draw aggressively. It's not like people are necessarily just going to overcall because they have a flush draw. I kind of already talked about slow playing, and Maria does oblige and did have that flush draw. Maybe she sticks it in anyway if I raise the flop, but definitely less likely. So just you know, again, goes to show you don't necessarily have to raise to charge draws. If you have people who you suspect are going to play draws aggressively, it's a lot safer than you realize to slow play because if if they take a free card, it may mean that they don't actually have the draw, in which case you don't have to worry about it getting there. I mean, a spade is still not a great card for other reasons, like it kills action a bit, but it's not going to cost you the pot if people don't actually have two spades in their hand. So, you know, if you think people will bet when they have a draw, you don't have to be so afraid about still playing your hand. One thing that I hope this hand history will illustrate is that you don't have to play like a maniac to run up a stack. Sometimes I hear people talk this way, like you have to take a lot of chances in a tournament to run up a stack or something like that. And that's really not what's happened here. I mean, I've certainly had more than my share of luck in terms of getting a lot of action on my sets, and that's a big element. When you run up a big stack, that doesn't just mean that you played really well, and you can't just do that in every tournament. But you do want to play your hands well so that when luck is on your side, you're in a position to take advantage of it. And that's all that's happened here. I don't think I've done anything real crazy or real spectacular. Maybe a slow played in a few spots that you wouldn't have expected, but I certainly have not been playing a ton of hands. I've got a 2011 stats over about 100 hands, so it's not like I've just been playing a lot of really speculative hands or anything, and that's really not the key to running up a stack. It's just playing good poker and hoping that the situations play out your way, which they're going to play out your way more often than not when you're playing good poker. I think it's worth stabbing at the flop here, just because this is the board that I expect him to check fold somewhat often. Like, I am gonna defend, like, I'm calling him a lot pre-flop when he opens here. I'm not going to give up real easily on this flop, and I think there are a lot of hands better than Jack 9 that he's just going to check and fold. So I think it's worth taking a small stab here, in the kind of situation where I only have to succeed a third of the time to show a profit. I do have 2 overcards that are quite possibly live, so it's not like I'm drawing completely dead. This is a somewhat exploitable bet, but I think that's okay. I think he is going to check fold really often. As it happens, he checks and calls. I don't think he's going to fold anymore, so now I'm just going to be happy to try to hit a pair on the river. When I don't, I'm just going to give it up, and I don't think he was planning on folding that at any point in the hand, so I think I was right not to keep barreling at him, and I'm still happy with my flop bet. Got the riverman up here. So pretty clear open with 9s, and I don't think there's really any case for jamming here. I think I'm going to be in pretty bad shape against his calling range. He's got pretty taggish, maybe bordering on nitty stats, so I'm mostly just set minding when I call here. There are a few flops I might continue with that don't contain a set, and it'll depend on what he does as well. But probably if he bets this flop, I think I would call once and fold to a shove. It would depend on the size of his bet, but I think this might be in my call folding range. Not the greatest turn card for me. His check gives me a lot of hope, though. I think that if he has queens plus without a club, I think he's certainly going to shove here. He might check queens plus with a club. I think it's a good check, but not one that a lot of people make. So I think that his check is pretty likely to be honest, and I think there's a good chance that 9s are the best hand. The problem is that I don't think I can really get a lot of money out of worse hands. I think he's either check folding or he has me beat. So when I'm betting with 9s, it's almost a bluff, even though I have the best hand, which is okay because the pot is huge compared to his stack, but I really don't want to risk very much. Because the stacks are so shallow, I do think that if I had a set here, or if I had a flush, I wouldn't have to bet very big. So I think the right play is to bet quite small, and in this case, I think I would fold if European shoved. I think we're going to see like a set of jacks, maybe a set of jacks with a club, and queens plus, 10s plus maybe. But I think he's going to have like a better pocket pair than mine at a club very often when he check shoves. He might check shove with ace king in one club also, but I think he's more likely to just shove with that hand because when he checks, there's some chance I can make a committing bet. Like he doesn't know that I'm going to underbet when he checks. So I think if he had ace king with a club, he would be more inclined, if he was going to play it aggressively, just to shove it. So I think the right play here is to bet small and fold, but also to have a bet small calling range so that people can't just jam on you because you bet small. That's another thing that I see on the forum sometimes is people wonder, well, if I bet small, doesn't that mean he's going to shove on me, and then what do I do? No, it's not a guarantee that he shoves on you when you bet small, and as long as you're also betting small with value hands, it's okay to have a bet folding range, which is my plan here with the 9s. As it happens, he does call me. I'm not really sure what to make of that, and maybe he's choosing to play queens or something in a weird way. I don't really see any case for shoving the river. I don't think he's going to fold a better hand. I don't think he's going to call with a worse hand. So let's just see whether I have the winner. I do, and he has ace king with a club, which if he had just shoved the turn, he would have won the pot. But he didn't have the stones to do it, and instead he lost another 1,000 chips. Thank you, European. Actually, let's go ahead and call it a video here, and we will resume in part 2.